by Amenátegui Valdez we have on show in Mexico City right now. But being so close to the US, we cannot avoid taking a peep over the wall to see what's happening in our neighboring country. And talking about in COVID.
It says it's fine for us. No. Is that the better one down here? Because I don't think
Ardmore is the name with one. Do you want to try it?
Sure.
Wait, no. Because that is a Google one.
When you want me to start? Okay, now, thank you so much. Alison and Lapchi, do you hear me as well? Yes, okay, fantastic. So we start the second retake. I hope this works now. So I'm going to start it over again so we can use this as a theme. So thank you so much for joining us tonight in this first edition of La Casa del Vecino, our neighbor's house. As a non-profit organization, LIGA has been promoting emergent Latin American architects for almost 10 years, like the beautiful exhibition of Amenátegui Valdez we have currently on show in Mexico City. But being so close to the US, we cannot avoid taking a peep over the wall to see what's going on in our neighboring country. And talking about neighbors, what better topic to discuss than the private house, especially in COVID times when we all, I guess you as well, have spent too much time in our domestic space. And so we're presenting now a first series of 5 30-minute conversations in which we will discuss one single residential project by outstanding architectural practices from the USA. Today we'll talk with you, Alison, office Kwong Von Glinow in Chicago about their Ardmore House. Next Wednesday, we'll talk with Jennifer Bonner about her house Gables in Atlanta, and we will continue discussing project by Moss Architects, Johnston, Marklee, and Independent Architecture. We want to thank enormously Panel Rey for making this project happen. As a company that is increasingly present on both sides of the border, I think your support for this program is a well-suited gift to LIGA. So thank you very much, Ramiro and Humberto, to support this program. Saludos to the team at LIGA as well, our coordinator Adriana Maurer, Daniela Treviño, and Arturo Arrieta, who's now moving the controls in backstage. Thanks as well to the friends of Arkine. Arkine is now transmitting this on their channels as well to reach a broader public in Latin America. Now back to you, Alison and Lapchi. I kept you waiting for a moment, my apologies. So again, thank you for accepting our invitation. I must say that it was actually Anne Rieselbach, the program director of at the Architecture League of New York, that recommended me taking a closer look at your work for this program. And so when I got in touch with you and I received the first images of your recently completed, I think we have a sort of premiere here this evening, and recently completed Ardmore House, I was extremely happy to feature this project as the kickoff for this series. Apart from some maybe better known key projects in contemporary US architecture, we were really looking at LIGA to see if we could get some lesser known or some brand new projects with a strong agenda for this program. So I think this is a very strong kickoff. In all its straightforward simplicity, your Ardmore House plays a balancing act between being conventional and innovative. The way the program is organized, but also the way the house represents itself, the way it relates to the front and the side, and the way it combines very orthogonal basic plan layouts with this sensual curvilinear line. I think it's a very tricky balancing act that I think you mastered beautifully. Now, to explain the public a little bit, we scripted this conversation around several questions in order to allow Lapchi and Alison to answer my questions with graphic materials, and so everybody here finally knows what this Ardmore House is, because nobody really knows until now. So to start off and to get the audience a little bit informed, so what is the Ardmore House and who did you make this house for? Alison and Lapchi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. We're so...
You're on mute still, I think.
Oh.
Oh no, it's my fault. My mistake. Go
Okay,
ahead. Perfect.
Very good. Very good. So thank you very much for having us. We're really excited to be a part of this program, and we're very excited to share this house with you. So a little bit of background information for this home. It's not a typically designed home for a commissioned client. This home actually is a development project of ours. We are a very young office. We started our practice 3 years ago. And when we started our practice, we wanted to split how we spent our time in the office between development work, something that we would propose and commission ourselves to work on, and as well as more traditional commission-based work. So Ardmore House is actually a development project. And it was interesting when we started telling people that this is what we wanted to do when we got back here. They would say, oh, so you want to make a spec house? And a spec house traditionally has a pretty negative connotation, that it's really market driven, not very design conscious. But we actually like the origination of the word, which is speculative, a speculative house. And that was our intention with this home, to really rethink what is the home and what can the home be in the future, and what can the home be in a very urban context and as a single family home. So that's kind of how we started out this project. Maybe I could show the first slide. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you'll see this home, maybe from this image you can't quite tell, but it's on an alleyway. That's where the car is driving. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the site condition here. It's a really traditional urban site in Chicago, where we have all these 25-foot by 125-foot lots. And so when we were looking for land with our real estate agent, as a developer, we had a very tight budget to work with. So the properties we were seeing were something was always wrong with them, basically. And they were undesirable in one way or another. And this one in particular, our real estate agent was suggesting we do not buy because it's noisy along the alleyway. There's no privacy. He said, you're just going to see garbage trucks all day long. No one will ever want to buy a new home here. And so we understood those concepts, and we thought maybe we could try to design around them in an interesting way. Mm-hmm. And so the next slide just shows that condition a bit more, to say that you can see this is on the alleyway. So we wanted to take the standard lot and transform it.
So when you talk about, often when we talk about the American house or the residential project in America, one often thinks about sort of generic suburban residential plot, no? So often mm-hmm. conditions are quite, let's say, banal or not relevant for the design development.
Yep.
In your case, that is different. No, the site became like a sort of crucial motor to start to develop your project.
Yeah, it's very true. If this had been a lot in the middle of the block, we would have had a very different response. But because we had so many constraints to work with, we had to really rethink not just what is living in a very abstract way to think what is the future of living, but how can we make living desirable on this particular lot at the same time? So it was these two forces at once that we were really working with.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we could go back to the slides and then the next one. So our approach to this site had to be, how can we work with this privacy issue and this noise issue? And when we think about the traditional section, traditionally in a single family home, you sleep on your second floor and you have all of your living program on the first floor, like your kitchen, your dining, and your family room, and then you store everything in your basement. So what we wanted to do was flip that traditional section so that the spaces where you spend the most time in would be above the alleyway and where a lot of light could come in, versus where you sleep, that's where you can have less light. And if we pushed all the bedrooms against the neighboring lot, we would have more privacy. So in the next diagram that shows that. So we created this more solid middle section, which is where the bedrooms would be, and we pushed them further against the neighboring apartment, so they would have more privacy from the alleyway. And then the second level is structured as totally open by these 4 trusses.
Mm-hmm. Making the shifts you proposed, I explained it earlier, or talked about as a sort of tricky balancing act between the conventional and the innovative. Mm-hmm. Of course, when you do this shift, you also all of a sudden live underneath these roof trusses. No, they will come to play a sort of an important role in the way you live the house. Is it structurally as well a sort of balancing act between the traditional and some more daring proposal? Can you explain us a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Can we show the slide, please? Next, please. So in here, we show that the conventional structure is, we didn't see the structure at this moment, but we see the space beyond that. On level 1 is more solid. That is kind of referred to what Alison had mentioned about the living space. On upper floor is the living room that is very open. We kind of see the truss is kind of spanning on across the house. So you kind of see the openness that we kind of described. Next. And in the way that we see the courtyard here is showing that how open the space is, and the bedroom is pushing on the neighbor side. Next, please. And here is what Wonne was talking about, the convention method. The one thing is about the facade on the west side that is 2-story high. When we come back from Switzerland to work and come back to open our office, we want to find something very conventional. What Wonne was talking about is the Chicago. Next, please.
Can you tell us where you were working in Switzerland?
We were working for Herxel and Dermont Architect, and this is the exact thing about, we want to find something, a conventional technique in Chicago that is easy to build for the builder. At the same time, something that can be grounded for the Chicago context. On the left side of the wall, of the west wall, is a double high wall. We use the Chicago balloon frame that is a 2 by stud that grounded from level 1 to level 2 that hold up the 4 trusses on the right side. Next, please. Once the 2 by truss holding up the entire roof, on level 1, the courtyard become very open, and we do not want to call this space of the hallway, but as the interior courtyard space. And in this interior courtyard space, we think that the best way to allow the potential owner to use this space is to create program within this courtyard. From the 3 doors that you can see is to go to the individual bedroom, but the first space that we see is the mudroom that is on your left side. And so I can replay it again. And the bookshelves is allow people to put a book on a bookshelf and then able to read the books on the middle of the space that where the lady is sitting on the chair. And the nook, that the square nook, is for people to sit or to enjoy the space. And the last is the entrance space. Next, please. And this is the view from level 2 looking back to level 1. The width of the courtyard is only 6 feet wide, the widest part, and facing the picture window. Next, please. Can we go back 1 slide? Next, please. And once you are in the interior courtyard, you see the 4 trusses holding up by the Chicago balloon frame on the left side. Next, please. This is the diagram to show the truss is extremely conventional, that is spanning across the entire width of the lot, 22 feet. And on the right side is the 2 2x6, a very conventional way to build building in Chicago. Next, please. While we are framing this house, this is a construction photo showing the west facade. That is a 2 2x6 spanning from level 1 to level 2. Next, please. A interior view showing on the left-hand side the Chicago balloon frame. Next, please. When the rough framer finished framing the house, he was very hesitant to take out the diagonal bracing that you can see 4 diagonal bracing holding up the house, because he can't believe that the house is only supported by 4 trusses. We work with a very good engineer Bob Magruder, that to only use 4 trusses, but at the same time a very conventional method of the Chicago balloon frame to holding up the entire house. Next, please.
It looks very light indeed.
Mm-hmm. So up here you can see that this is now without the bracing, and it's allowed for this, the structural system has allowed for the double height here.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about many things now, the program and the structure, and it's of course a very strong, in many of your projects in the end, there's a very strong formal gesture that kind of gives the project, in this case, the house, a strong identity. No, and in this case, it's of course this hand railing, this balustrade that makes this hallway, which indeed it's extremely interesting when you say that's only 6 feet wide at its widest point, while it feels like space. 6 feet, almost like a corridor, but it also just by the slight, the curvilineous quality, it makes it also elegant and so almost, how would I say, like, yeah, it has sort of a parlor atmosphere from a different era. No, it's almost sort of. So this long curved line is actually a gesture in plan, but it really starts to work. It really starts to activate a section of the house. Mm-hmm. Can you speak about how that simple introduction of this curved line into this orthogonal plan kind of makes the house?
Yeah, definitely. It makes it very different, as you're saying. Next slide, please. And I think it shows itself in the experience of how you experience that first floor. That 6 feet was really important when we were designing it. It was, as you said, like that dimension that it could start to feel like more than a corridor. But then it has a different effect on the second level. So if we go up the stairs, next slide, we're suddenly between this curved balustrade on our right-hand side and this orthogonal one on our left-hand side. And then you can see the trusses up above that are holding up this space together and allowing for this basically second level that's a complete platform level above level 1. And next slide. And so what's interesting about the curved balustrade on level 2 is really pushes anyone who's on the second level away from that west clerestory window. There's 56 feet of uninterrupted glazing looking out over the alleyway, but you're not actually directly next to it ever. You're all the way up to 9 feet away from it. So there's this distance of privacy, but there's still the spectacle of looking out across the alleyway, but just from a wider distance and being directly next to that window. Next slide. If you go back one slide. Okay. Oh, sorry, next slide. Yeah, great. And so here, this is a video taken of one of our models showing the second level. And you can see that it's completely open. It's the opposite of the level below that's just totally solid and concealing the bedrooms. Here it's very exposed. But what we did with the 4 triangular trusses was to try to create 5 distinct spaces upstairs. So this room here is the living room. Underneath the 2 trusses that receive natural light from the skylight is the powder room. Then this is the dining room. Then here is the kitchen island, also underneath 2 skylights between the trusses above. And then finally, the kitchen area. And then if you go to the next slide. So then this is looking down through the 4 trusses. Next slide. And going back to this idea of the site condition, what you're looking at in the site plan is the back of the apartment buildings across the way that also have all of these balconies coming off of them. So if you go to the next slide, this interior railing also becomes like an interior balcony that's facing these exterior balconies. So there becomes this interior-exterior urban relationship across the alleyway that I think is pretty interesting to experience. Next slide. And as you move along the alleyway, when you're looking towards the front of the home, it's a much more lush, traditionally beautiful greenery with these 100-year-old trees. And then next slide. You really feel like you're kind of up in the trees at the front of the home. Next slide. And then as you move towards the back, it becomes more and more urban as you're facing all of the back facades of the buildings. Next slide. And then even in the kitchen, you can see that you're looking across to the balconies of the neighbors across the way.
To me, no?
Sorry, I missed it. What did you say?
No, I said it also has a very Japanese vibe to me. You know, like it reminds me of a lot of contemporary Japanese architects, not only in its materiality, of course, but also like in these houses where all of a sudden like sort of different sectional strategies are applied to kind of, yeah, create a sort of intersection of smaller spaces, making the house all of a sudden like absolutely generous and three-dimensional. I think that's what happens with a lot of housing project, that the only place where the house is really three-dimensional is the moment of the intersection of the staircase.
Yeah.
And I think here that is something, that's something completely, much more.
One thing is about, you mentioned about Japanese, is I think Japanese architecture is willing to accept the urban reality. And when we built this house in Chicago, and the way to frame the view is not trying to be biased, is anything is fine because we accept the reality of what the surrounding is. We accept where the neighbor's house, the balcony, that's not the bad thing. It's just the reality of the space. And we, instead of hiding this, we kind of celebrate this condition. I think that's why it's similar to the Japanese architecture context. Yeah,
I think that's really interesting that you say that, because it's really true. I think they really sometimes they're very daring in the way they construct their architecture, because they're just also willing to understand that they live a lot of times in architecture also. And I'm thinking about some houses of Goasegawa, for example. They relate to, in a very open way, to the pedestrian alleyways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times we relate the single family house as sort of very introvert module that is not really searching to relate to the city or to the context, apart from one single facade. No, their frontal facade is their representation on the street. And I think classical or traditionally, a lot of the single family houses, especially in the city, have been like only the facade is actually the design element, and that's why all of a sudden these back facades become so interesting as well, because that's where they become all of a sudden more spontaneous and more loose. And I wonder a little bit, now that you've taken that step, to kind of engage in a much more frank and open way to the context, how that experience has been, how's that relationship with the neighbors been? You've told us about the balcony that overlooks the balcony of the neighbors, and I know that neighbors have been even commenting on your house and stuff. No, when they
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Maybe can we go to the slide?
Yeah, that's here where you, for example, see the balconies of the neighbors in front. No?
Exactly. And then the next slide. So the house has sort of accepted this interior balcony condition and embraced it a lot, even in the sense with how we've staged it. We put plants against the railing similar to our neighbors across the way. And these plants have really grown to love the western sunlight, and they're now coming through the railing similar to the balconies across the way. Next slide. Maybe.
Yeah, I think this is what you were trying to mention about the language. And when we started our practice and also doing this Ardmore House, we want to not just understand architecture, we want to find a way to do architecture that is able to relate it to everyone, and especially my parents and anyone that is close to us. And when we design this house, maybe the house form is a placeholder. We didn't really spend a lot of energy in the beginning to find a form of a house, but we're aware that a house form is, even a little kid can enjoy a house form exactly like this. And since we know the interior, we do a lot of eruption on the interior, and then we want to find a way to relate it back to people about how does the house look like, and instead of let them think about is this a house or not, once they see the form, they know it's a house. Next slide, please. On this slide, it's quite interesting. While we are building this house, a lot of neighbors never see a plan of this house or go inside during the construction site, but they understand the house. And we found it very interesting that people understand the house by looking at the outside, that they're aware that on the ground floor is quite solid. There's not so much window except the picture window you see in the alleyway. And beyond the picture frame, that there's a door there. It's kind of suggesting perhaps the bedroom is on the level 1. And on level 2, there was a 56-foot long ribbon window. Perhaps it's going to be the living space. Even they do not go inside, but the form suggests that the flipping of the section that is living on top and sleeping on the ground level.
And it's interesting. We've actually witnessed neighbors explaining to other people what's going on in the house, just like that. Like if we've had a window open, we've heard this happen. So it's sort of really interesting how the home communicates itself.
Next, please. You may wonder why the facade is black and gray. Perhaps we get a clue here from the Range Rover. And initially the house is actually all black. And we found that a black monolithic house is quite massive and it doesn't really fit the scale of the neighborhood. And one day, Andersen and I was driving around and see our favorite car that we cannot afford is the new Range Rover, which show here is black on the top and gray on the bottom. We will start questioning why a new expensive car start to make this kind of two color tone, and maybe is to break up the scale of this massive car. And we kind of test out some rendering. Next slide, please. To test out some collage and rendering to show maybe we can use it bi-color to break up the scale of the house. And we got so excited and we sent it to our brother and an image of this rendering, an image of the Range Rover. And then he kind of joked, he sent it back another image to us. Next slide, please. Is the Rothko painting is literally black on top and gray on the bottom. And he kind of jokingly say, do not tell anyone about the Range Rover. Let's just tell everyone about it's inspired by the Rothko painting. And the interesting part of this is architect us, we kind of got inspiration from Range Rover, but at the same time, my brother is an engineer that he's talking about a Rothko painting.
Exactly.
Next slide, please. And this is the image showing at night on the alleyway. To go and back what Andersen is saying, the neighbor even haven't gone inside the house. They suggested that 4 truss looking on the level 2 is a very open space, and on level 1 that is all the bedroom facing the neighbor side is only a picture window facing the alley.
Yeah, it's interesting because that picture window makes it. I mean, with the front door and the picture window, kind of the house doesn't seem to have a direction. It seems to kind of have as much emphasis to its side facade as it has to its front facade. And I think that's really really beautiful in its development. And of course, I didn't. The reason why I wanted to talk to you is not only because I like the Ardmore House. I also am interested in your full body of work. I think it's always interesting. I think projects just do not stand by themselves. There's always a creator or team of creators behind this. And I really wonder how this project, because this is, if I understand well, your first build project. So how that first build project relates to the rest of your work, of your design work, and how maybe as well, like building something or your experiences building something have changed or have made you think different about certain elements of the practice. I think that could be quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think for this project, it goes back to about trying to make the project relatable and understandable. I think that's something how we try to approach a lot of the work in our office. If you go to the next slide, we have a diagram showing how we try to communicate pretty simple, obvious forms and their usefulness or their potential to be used as architecture. So for Ardmore House, I think our goal here was to really communicate this flipping section that the facade tries to communicate. Maybe there's also something about the two-tone facade that is also communicating that something's reversed on the inside. We also have a Riverwalk project along the Chicago River that we'll be working on next summer, or building next summer. Mm-hmm. And that project, if you go back one slide, is a big pyramid canopy that has different playful items underneath it. And this, I think, is communicating a symbol of a space to come and enjoy and try out something new in. And our tabletop apartments, the last project in this diagram, is really simply the form of what a table is like, stacked on top of each other to create apartment buildings. And the idea, I think, with a lot of these forms is a phrase we use a lot, which we say borrowing the familiar, as a way to try to take something that many people know and recreate it, repurpose it, or re-image it, that it can still be recognizable, but maybe has a different use, a different experience, a different atmosphere. But there's still this connection that it's not this totally foreign, unknown alien object that you're going into, but there's sort of some familiarity already. So there's something that's relatable and easy to understand.
With the tabletop apart, that would be almost like the simplicity of a structure of floor slabs and columns, you know, like
exactly.
kind of table, this kind of table structure.
Right. And then we have one more slide, I think. If you go to the next slide, here, this is just maybe more in-depth example that I think is kind of interesting that we took a lot of, or this was one of the first projects we worked on as an office together. And what was important here was thinking about new housing typologies and how we could rethink living very densely. And when we study a lot of housing plans, we often see a double loaded corridor with very simple housing units on either side. And this was a space we really wanted to never have to put into a project of ours. So in all of our projects for housing, we tried to erase the corridor. And this is one example of that we also brought into Ardmore by creating the curved interior courtyard. So even though it's a totally different scale, we've tried to bring concepts across projects.
Yeah, I can really see how there's a sort of formal excuse or something that kind of throws things off and allows you to kind of rethink and then to create new typologies. Because in the end, you're not interested, I believe, in creating that formal exception. That's just maybe sort of a starting point, an excuse, but to then really create these different housing solutions and typologies like you did at the Ardmore House. I find it absolutely fascinating. I'd love to talk longer, but as you know, I mean, we never managed. I don't think we will ever manage. I'm trying to keep this within like 30 minutes. But I just want to thank you again for being with us and showing your project. I think this was an extremely good kickoff. I hope to see more of your studio soon. I want to invite everybody as well to join us next week for Jennifer Bonner. She's going to talk about Haus Gables in Atlanta. And then the next 3 shows after that as well. Alison and Lapchi, thank you so much. And thanks again to Panel Rey for making this possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. See you soon. We talk later.
Ciao.
Bye.